Told you I loved it. Yes? No? Maybe so? Yes? Right on. If I would have only had this chapter when I was raising my children, that's okay because it's never too late with God. Amen? All right. How do boundary abilities develop? I messed up my little holder up here, so hopefully it keeps my phone on here. All right. You guys ready to rock and roll? He starts off with a story. And this story was about Mr. Can Do, Jim. At work, everybody called Jim Mr. Can Do because he was dependable and he was always there. Jim was, in fact, a workaholic. But Jim's family didn't call him Mr. Can Do. His family called him the Phantom. Can you imagine why? Because he was never home. He was always at work. So finally, his wife Becca had had enough, and she told him that she wanted to have a discussion with him and let him know that she felt like she was a single parent and that she really missed him. And he said, yeah, honey, I'd like to say no to people, but it's just so hard. To which Becca replied, well, it's not hard to say no to somebody, me and the kids. He had absolutely no problem saying no to his wife and his children, but when it came to the work area, he couldn't say no. And as soon as she said this to him, of course, what set into him was shame and pain, helplessness, and it just started rolling out of his mouth that he truly indeed hated his life. And he did not know how it got this way. How many of you know that a lot of times in our lives, we have to get to this point to where we will actually facilitate change in our lives? Sometimes we have to get to the point where we're like, okay, this is not working. My wife and my children are what means everything to me. And if they're the ones that feel shut out from me, something isn't working. I need change. So that is where he found himself because he loved his family very much and he did not want to lose these precious relationships. So this is when he went to the counselor. So we're going to talk about tonight, how do boundary abilities develop? The first thing that we need to know is boundaries are not inherited from parent to parent, from parent to child. They're not inherited. Boundaries are built. Now, if I were to go out on this parking lot right up here, not the one where there's concrete back here, but where there's parking lot, and I built you a house right now, would any of you live in it? If Maria built you a freestanding house out of wood, would any of you live in it? Right. So would you live in it? Okay, what would happen if I built you a house and the storms came? Yeah, huff and puff and blow your house down. And this is where we find our lives when we don't have boundaries. We find that we have built our life around a house that it's not sturdy. It doesn't last through the test of time. So we have to understand that we have to build. Now, if I were to want to learn how to build a home, I would need to know the laws of building. Just like if I wanted to know how to fly a plane, I would need to know what the laws of flying the plane were, right? So that's what we're here doing. A lot of us, and we're never, ever, ever putting shade on our family of origin because understand, things are learned for generations upon generations. Things are passed down. And so we're not here to ever put shame on anybody, but we need to know why we think the way we think, why we operate the way we operate, why we build our houses that when the storms come, they blow over, and then we need to fix them. How dumb would I be if a storm came and I was living in a house that blew over? How dumb would I be to put that house right back up the way it was? Pretty dumb. And yet we do it with our lives every single day, all the time. And we think, okay, this time it'll work. Okay, this time it'll work. This time it absolutely has to work, but we have to know why it's not working. And I know it makes us feel a lot of times so uncomfortable to look at the areas that are not working in our lives. What does it do? It brings shame. It brings painfulness, it brings grief, it brings all these things, but it's important because all of us want to pass down a legacy that lasts, a legacy that stands, a legacy that we're proud of, a legacy that our children can say, yes, my parents did this and it helped me build boundaries. So that's what we're doing here. So in order to be truth-telling, responsible, free, and loving people that God wants us to be, we need to learn this from childhood on. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Oh, well, Lord, I'm not quite a child anymore. I'm 50 years old. What happens now? Boundaries, this is the good news, you guys. Boundary development is an ongoing process, but it is the most crucial when children are small that we get this. And if your children are grown, if you're grown, if your children are indeed grown, it's okay. We can still learn this stuff. So don't hear condemnation out of any of this. If you're just now raising your kids, I wish there was a lot of young marrieds in here who are just raising their kids, but hopefully they can listen to this online and it will help them, because I would have given anything to have it. So the Bible tells us that a parent should start their children off on the way that they should go, and when they grow old, they will never depart from it. But many parents think that the way they should go means the way the parents think they should go. Do you see anything wrong with a boundary problem there? You see already that there's a crooked boundary in that. There's wrong thinking in that. The verse means this: the way God planned them to go. Parenting is never about bludgeoning the child into some clone or into an ideal of a perfect child. How many of you feel like, especially with your oldest child, how many of you feel in raising them that you always expected them to be perfect? I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. Man, that perfect child, they're going to be they're who we learn on the most, let's just be honest. But man, they're going to be the ideal child, the perfect child. And I will tell you guys, when I took my son, Josiah, by the way, today would have been his 30th birthday. What is the date? What is the month this month? October 20th, sorry. Today would have been his 30th birthday. But when I took that boy, he was 18 years old, and he had a full-ride scholarship to college, and Jason and I procured him an apartment, and we went up and we stocked it full of everything that he needed, furniture, beds, everything, and he was off to college. Let me tell you what I did. Man, you're a kick booty mama. Whoo! It was my perfect child. Never did I dream that 5 years later he'd be dead of an overdose on his floor. But don't we want that? Don't we think that them being perfect is a reflection of us? Do you see a boundary issue right then and there? They're not. That's not what the Bible is talking about. The Bible is talking about in the way God planned them to go, not in the way the parent planned them to go. So, as a parent, it is our job to be a partner in helping our young ones discover what God intended for them and helping them reach that goal. It is not what mom intended for them. Jason and I were talking about this with some friends today, that freshman and sophomore, at the beginning of sophomore year, I was a basketball player. Jason's a basketball coach. We live, eat, slept, and drank basketball. That was our lives. And so our oldest son comes along, and dude, you're going to play basketball. He was this little, by the way, until he was 19, and then he sprouted up to be 6 foot. But it took him a long time to grow. But he was going to be a basketball player, and that boy was with. So he was David, and he was with a ton of Goliaths. So his entire team were up here, big old boys, and here he was, and he sat the bench all freshman year. And he sat the bench beginning of sophomore year until Jason and I said, Josiah, do you want to be playing basketball? And he said, no, I hate basketball. What? He's like, I want to play soccer. The boy walked onto the soccer team, and he was a starter. He never left the game. From that point on, he was their number one goal on the left. He was a left footer. He was their number one goal scorer from then on. But talk about training up a child in the way you want them to go. How awful of boundary issues is that? We're to train them up in the way God wants them to go and then help them get to that goal. So we all pass through stages, and in each of these stages there is distinct tasks to perform. There are specific phases and boundary development. So that's what we're going to look at tonight. So you can say phase or stage, whichever one you prefer. It's easier for my brain to say phase. So that's what I wrote. So phase 1 is the bonding phase. The foundation of boundary building is bonding. What is bonding? Bonding is an emotional attachment to another person. It's the ability to relate to another person on the deepest level. This is where a child learns protection, care, safety, and welfare is within the relationship, the bonding relationship. Relationships or bonding, either way you want to say that, is the foundation of God's nature. Relationship or bonding is the nature, is the foundation of God's nature. The opposite of bonding, do you know what it is? Isolation. So what happens when you have an isolated parent have a baby? What can they transfer to that baby? Nothing. Nothing. Keep that in mind. Okay? So I want you to think about this for just a second. So let's go way back to the Garden of Eden. And this isn't in the book. This is actually, I'm hoping that after this class that Pastor and I can do the next book, which is, Linda, do you remember the name of it? I don't remember the name of it. It's out of that. Anyways. I would have suggested you guys buy it right now, but it's two deep books at the same time, and it might crush you, and I don't want that. So, but let's go back to Adam and Eve. And in the garden, when Jesus created Adam and Eve, they were completely bonded. They were completely together. They knew Jesus in an intimate way. They could be fully themselves with no conflict whatsoever. And when sin came into the picture, what happened? They were torn apart. The relationship was torn. And from that moment on, they became people in pain. So before sin, they were people who were attached, people who were in relationship, people who were bonded. But after sin, they became people in pain. So the first developmental task of infants is to bond with mom and dad. And mom and dad need, not that they do, they need to provide a predictable emotional environment. Predictable, emotional environment. What did you guys come from? I just have to throw that out there. Did you come from anything predictable? Predictable emotionally? Was it stable? So, when we don't come from a predictable emotional environment, we develop what they call anxious attachment or avoidant attachment. So when God created us to have secure attachment, this is where our little personalities are developed. This is where we understand what that emotional bond is. Here's where we're free to be ourselves. When sin has come in and when it's not there, then we develop this crazy attachment style. And it gives us massive problems when we grow up. We have this anxious attachment style, meaning when I fail you, are you going to leave me? Are you going to leave me? I'm constantly worried, like, what's going to happen? And if I've gone too far this time, and I'm such a mess, and anxious, constantly anxious that the bond has been broken. Or avoidant. I'm just going to withdraw from you, and I'm just going to pretend like I don't know you, and I'm not bonded to you. And that's never what God intended. But you can see where that is developed, right? It's developed in this very first stage of bonding. So when you've skipped as a newborn baby and as a tiny little infant, when you've skipped the bonding stage, then a lot of times when you get to be an adult and you realize that you have no idea what it looks like to be emotionally attached to anybody, you've got to go back. You've got to go back to stage 1. I tell people a lot, and I won't use the word that I normally use because it might be offensive to some of you, but I'll use the word arrested. I feel like in my life I was completely arrested in the emotional arena. And so I didn't know how to bond. I mean, I loved with what I knew. I gave everything. I loved my husband with everything that I knew, but I never knew how to bond. I had to go back to this stage and learn secure attachment. Now, Am I there all the way? Can I tell you I'm secure in all my attachments? No. I'm learning and I'm growing and I'm building my house. But this time I'm building it on a firm foundation. So it's just a little bit different. So when the boat is rocked, and it always is going to be, you guys, we're always going to experience storms in our relationships. That's just the nature of fallen man. If you guys think that you're perfect, you probably are going to the wrong church. Because in this church, we are full of imperfect people. So as long as you have imperfect people in a relationship, there's going to be some waves. And if you have anxious or avoidant attachment, there's going to be some major problems, isn't there? But when you learn to be bonded, that the waves don't change the relationship. The waves mean that we work it out. The waves mean that we sit down together and we go through this together. The waves mean that's what secure attachment looks like. Now, think about in your life right now, maybe you're my age, maybe you're in your 50s, maybe you're 40s, 30s, whatever. Do you have lifelong friendships? If you do, that means that you probably know how to bond. If you don't, that means you probably don't know how to bond. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so mom woos the baby into entering into a relationship with the world via attachment to her. Bonding takes place when mom responds to the needs of the child, the need for closeness, for being held, for food, and for changing. And as the baby experiences the needs and the mother's positive response to those needs, the baby begins to internalize. This is where internalization begins. What happens? What do we internalize if mom never bonds to baby? Think about that. What do you internalize? I'm not loved. I'm not worthy to be loved. I'm a mess. I was too much. I was this. You internalize that something's wrong with me. You guys know what the proper name for that is shame. You internalize, who am I? And all you see yourself through is a lens of shame. Okay, so the baby begins to take an emotional picture of a loving, constant mother. At this stage, babies have no sense of self apart from mom. So it is mom and me, and we are the same. The emotional picture developed by infants forms from thousands of experiences in the first few months of life. The child has an internal sense of belonging and safety. Jason's sister, his late sister, she died of cancer, but she developed a little boy that they called it failure to thrive. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. But when this baby was small, the mother had really, really bad postpartum stress, I guess is what they call it. Yep. And she couldn't deal with him, so she would lock him in a room, and she would stay as far apart as she could. In her mind, she was protecting that baby from her because she was depressed and she didn't know what she would do. But he would go hours without eating, and so it gave him what they called failure to thrive. And so when Jason's sister got him, they told her, and she's like, well, that's okay. Our family's thriving. It's not a big deal. He'll be totally fine. She couldn't make him eat. He would go a full entire day without eating anything at all. Like he literally was arrested. I'll use that word again. He was literally arrested in the emotional arena because a baby needs to know that they're secure, that they're loved, that they're attached. They don't see it as you and me just yet. So they see it as just one. So when the baby is sure of the unconditionality of their attachment figure, baby develops feelings of security, of stability, and self-esteem. And it facilitates empathy, comfort, love, and emotional communication, which is beautiful. All those experiences pay off in a child's inner self of security. And when the Bible in Ephesians 3:17 says rooted and grounded in love, this is when they have been successfully bonded, when they have learned what bonding is. But when we fail to bond, now let me talk to us adults in the room who failed to bond. Here's some of the symptoms: depression, feelings of meaninglessness, feelings of badness. I'm bad. I'm inherently bad. Do you guys know what the opposite of a bad self is? A loved self. A lot of people think the opposite of a bad self is a good self, so I'm going to be good. I'm going to be good, and then I get bad. And then I'm going to be good, and I'm going to be good, and I get bad. And then I fall down, and I unattach. But if you feel loved and if you feel secure, you can fall down all day long, and nothing changes. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. All right. Addiction. These are all when we fail to bond. These are some of the symptoms that can come up later. Distorted thinking, emptiness, sadness, a fear of intimacy, panic, rage, excessive caretaking, and fantasy. God's plan from the very beginning was for us to be loved enough by Him and others to not feel isolated, even when we're alone. A lot of times when you feel like you're completely alone, it's because you haven't learned how to have a secure bond. It's because you feel like you're ripped apart from the relationship. Okay, phase 2, separation and individuation. So this one is the construction of a soul. So as an infant gains a sense of internal safety and attachment, a second need arises, the baby's need for autonomy. Now, let me just tell you, when this separation and individuation has not occurred, when you get older and you begin going, first of all, through the bonding stage and then through this stage, it will repeat itself. So if you're like, well, man, that's where I'm at, that's okay. That just means you're going through the stages now and you're learning it the proper way. So that's okay. We all have a need for autonomy. Did you know that? God knew that when He gave us all a free choice, right? God wants us to be free to love Him, to choose to love Him, not to be forced. He could have forced any of us, right? Because He made us. But He didn't do that. He gave us our autonomy, our independence. So this is what looks like the terrible twos. It can start before 2. I know a lot of mamas that said, man, my kid went through their terrible twos at 1.5 or at 1. It's normal. That's fine. But the terrible twos is a perfect way for you to understand what this looks like during this time. So separation, it refers to the child's need to perceive themselves as distinct. Not me. Distinct from mom. Mom is not me. This is when they begin to get that separation. And then individuation it describes the identity that the child develops while separating from the mom-me experience. So before, remember, it was mom and me, and this is where we learned the secure attachment. Now, all of a sudden, we begin to realize, wait a minute, mom isn't me. I'm an individual, and it has to happen because God put this need inside every one of us. God put the need for us to have autonomy, and God put the need for us to have our own distinct personality. You guys, you are not like me. I'm not like you. There's no two people in the world that are alike. We all are individuals, fearfully and wonderfully made, created by the King of Kings and Lord of Lords on purpose, and He made us different, and that's good. And sadly, a lot of people have painted it that it's bad, that if you don't look like me and I don't act like you, that I'm bad, and that's the wrong thinking. But you cannot have a me until you first have a not me. So first, determine who you aren't before you discover the true, authentic aspects of your God-given identity. The separation, individuation process is not a smooth transition into a person. And I want you to think about the terrible twos and how hard those were. Now I want you to think about a 40-year-old going through it. A lot of times, you guys, we sit in judgment of people because we don't understand. We're like, what's wrong with you? You're such a train wreck. It's because they're barely going through this. They're barely learning who they are. They're barely getting an identity of their own. They're barely pulling themselves away from mama or whoever it was that they've been attached to. They're barely pulling themselves away, learning to stand on their own 2 feet, and it's not pretty. It's not a pretty stage, and especially when it's in a 40-year-old, like I said. But it's not a smooth transition, but 3 phases are critical to developing healthy boundaries, and here they are: hatching, practicing, and rapprochement. Hatching, practicing, and rapprochement. So the first one is hatching. Mom and me are not the same. So for the first 5 to 10 months of life, mark a major shift in infants from mom and me the same to mom and me are not the same. During this period, baby begins moving out of their passive union with mom and into an active interest in the outside world. My little Revy right now, She barely turned 1, and she's going from this stage to the next stage. She's practicing right now, but it's so cool watching her go and explore and touch things and taste things. You know, everything goes in a baby's mouth. Taste things and feeling new things. It's cool. They all of a sudden they realize they are there's an outside world. What? There's other things besides just mom. There's an outside world. Now, they still are dependent on mom in this stage, but they are beginning to realize there's something outside of mom. Again, think about this when you're 40 or 50. Think about what this looks like. 52, there you go. But this shows mom that nurturing has paid off and the child feels safe enough to start taking risks. So they begin going out and discovering and beginning to learn. And this can be very, very, very hard on a mama who has never hatched themselves. Mamas who have never hatched are dependent on that relationship with the kid. They have found their identity in the oneness because they've never learned there's a kid and there's me. They're them and I'm me. So this stage is tough. Now picture if your kid's 40 and mama is 60. Just get that picture in your head. Because I don't want you to freak out when we start going through this. Because all of a sudden mama's like, what? Are you pulling away from me? Like, what's going on? It's hard on mama because mama never learned herself to go through this stage. Okay, so the mama, they long for nothing but closeness, neediness, and dependency from their, whether it be a baby or an adult baby. It's painful boundary for mom, but necessary for the baby. The next phase is, in separation and individuation, is practicing. I can do anything. This is right where my grandbaby honestly is. She is to this point where if we turn our eye off of her for 1 second, she's all the way halfway up our stairs before Montana's hauling after her. She's at this. She's practicing. She's going for it, man. The world is her oyster, and she is going to discover every ounce of it. So he talks about Derek, who is in his late 40s, and he was a single man. He had been through a lot of relationships, and he was dressing like a college boy and looking for a young girl. And he said, I can't look for girls that are my own age because they don't have the energy, because I like late nights, loud music, and high energy. He was stuck in this phase. He was stuck in the practicing phase. He had never transitioned out of this. So a practicing child is trying to leave mama behind. Toddlers, they feel exhilaration and energy, and they want to try everything. Like I said with Revy, stairs, everything. Putting forks and light sockets, you name it. Chasing our cat Griffin, she does it all. Good parents will have fun with a toddler at this stage, a lot of fun. If the toddler wants to jump on the bed, a parent will not squelch them and say, don't do that, get off the bed. A parent will have a little bit of fun with limits. In other words, you're not going to let them run all over the bed and knock everything off the bed and knock the coffee off and knock my clothes off the bed, and my granddaughter swings around our chair, around and round, and all the laundry goes flying. And I've realized that's such a lack of limits on my part. I need to not do that. But a good mama will really invest in this time right here. Don't quench them. Don't quench their thirst for learning and their thirst for discovering. In the practicing phase, children learn that aggressiveness and taking initiatives are good. Aggressiveness and taking initiatives are good. Parents who firmly and consistently set realistic boundaries with children in this period, but without spoiling their enthusiasm, help them through this transition. When parents don't know how to do that, they don't help them through. They might shove them through. They might quench them to where they're staying here. Usually as parents, because we don't know how to do this, we do one or the other. We either quench them and shut them down where they're terrified of the world, they're terrified of that aggressiveness and initiative, or where you just shove them too fast forward and they don't have time to be in this process. So the practicing phase provides the child with the energy and the drive to make the final step toward becoming an individual. By the way, do you guys want your children, first of all, to be individuals? We should. And I ask that because if you would have asked me that when I was a 21-year-old mama, I would have said, no, they're a reflection of me. And I would have thought I was right because I didn't know. I had no idea. So that's why I ask these questions like, do you truly want them to be an individual, or do you want them to be a replica of you, or molded by you or formed by you? Or do you want them to live as unto the Lord? Think about that as we're going through this. Okay, so practicing children give way to the next phase, and that phase is reproachment. All of a sudden, the brakes go on, and baby realizes, I can't do everything. There is going to be consequences. So a restoration of harmonious relations. In other words, the child comes back to reality. The poor guy that I was talking about before in his 40s, he hadn't come back to reality yet. Oh, poor dude. But I can't tell you how many people I know, how many of these men now that are Jason and my age that are marrying girls that are my daughter's age. It absolutely kills me. But it's because of this right here, because they never graduated out of that stage. They didn't realize you can't do everything. Things have consequences to them. Okay, so realizing the world is a big, scary place, and I still need my mom. So they return to connection with mom. But the child brings a more separate self into the relationship. There are two people with two differing thoughts and feelings, and the child is ready to relate to the outside world without losing a sense of themselves. So once they come back, once reproachment sets in and they realize they can't do everything, they come back to the relationship, but they see it as they see it as where they end and mom begins, and where mom ends and where they begin. Do you see the boundary starting to form? How all of a sudden it's building it into the child. So, reproachment toddlers are obnoxious. 40-year-old reproachment people are obnoxious. 50-year-olds are obnoxious, oppositional, temperamental, and downright angry. It's so cute when they're little. How cute does it look on you? Okay, so let's look at some of the tools that a toddler uses to build boundaries in stage 1. This first one is going to surprise you. Anger. Children who can appropriately express anger are children who will understand. Children who can appropriately express anger are children who will understand when someone is trying to control them or hurt them. Sadly, a lot of us use anger for what it was not created for. Anger was created so that we can say no to evil. And where do they learn it? When they're little. And when is the time that we as loving parents squelch the anger? When they're little. And when we squelch it when they're little, when they're angry and they say, no, I don't like that, when we squelch it and tell them, you do what I say, then they grow to be adults or older and evil comes and they do what they say. We have to allow them to go through this stage of being angry because it's teaching them. It's created by God for a purpose to tell us there is a problem that needs to be confronted. When you squelch a child's anger and a child's no, they raise up to be children who do not know how to confront evil. They do not know how to confront anything in a relationship. They end up messing the entire relationship up. It's because they were never allowed to have this stage of anger. Number 2, ownership. Learning to take ownership, you guys, is essential for our lives. And let me tell you that when you have come from a codependent family, codependent mother who mom makes all the decisions, she tells you when you can wake up, when you can go to bed, when you brush your teeth, when you do everything. When you do that, you are training your child to never take ownership of their own life. And so when they get 30 and you're like, why do they still live with me? It's because you trained them that way. You literally trained them. Mom is going to take care of everything. So ownership is essential. It's the stewardship of our time, our energy, our talents, our values, our feelings, our behaviors, and our money. Because understand, without a mine, we have no sense of responsibility to develop. If I don't have anything that is mine, then what do I have to take ownership for? But in religious circles, they will tell you that when you say something is mine, you're being selfish. If you don't have anything that is mine, then what do you have to take ownership of? You'll just put everything onto everybody else. Well, if you wouldn't have done that, if you wouldn't have done that, if you wouldn't have done that, if you wouldn't have done that. If you wouldn't have asked me to go give you my full day, I wouldn't have done that. Whereas if I look at my life as mine and my time, I don't have the time to give you all day. I'm sorry. I can take ownership for that. Okay? So we have no sense of responsibility to develop, nurture, and protect these resources. Without a mind, we have no self to give to God and his kingdom. Oh. If you have not learned to take ownership of mine, what are you giving to God? Nada. Well, Mama told me I needed to go to church. What are you giving to God? Well, Mama told me I needed to give my time. What are you giving to God? Well, Mama told me I needed to give my money. What are you giving to God? We have got to learn to take ownership of our lives so that it's our decision what I'm giving God. I take ownership. And God develops this in me as I give it to him. But until I have ownership, I'm giving away something that I don't even see as mine. We have to see it as ours. So children desperately need to know that mine, my, and me are not swear words. How many of you were taught from as far as you can remember back, that it's not all about you? Don't say me. Think others, think others, think others, think others. Without correct biblical parenting, they will learn sacrifice and develop a giving, loving heart, but not until they have a personality that has been loved enough to give love away. You cannot give away what you do not own. You don't own your life, you don't have a life to give away. You don't own your time, you don't have time to give away. You don't own your money, you don't have money to give away. You don't own your no's, you don't have a no to give away. You don't own a yes, you don't have a yes to give away. The Bible says in 1 John 4:19 that we love because God first loved us. So the one-word statement, the one-word sentence, no. Toddlers going through reproachment use this one-word boundary constantly. It emerges during hatching and it's perfected during reproachment. No helps children separate from what they don't like. It gives them the power to make choices and it protects them. You know that one word that we were trying to squelch out of them at the age of 2? Little did we know what it was developing in them. No helps children separate from what they don't like. It gives them power to make choices and protects them. I'm going to say it one more time. No helps children separate from what they don't like. It gives them the power to make choices and it protects them. Often they become little no addicts for a while. No keeps them from feeling completely helpless and powerless. Parents have 2 tasks associated with no. Here they are. Number 1, we have to help them feel safe enough to say no, hereby encouraging their own boundaries. Small children should have a no that is listened to. Do you listen to your children's no's? Do you listen to your 40-year-old's no's or your 50-year-old's no's? Or do you try to control them? Or do you try to manipulate them out of their no's? No saying they can make, not saying that they can make all the choices that they'd like to, but a parent's job is to help the child feel as lovable saying no as you do when you say yes. So when the child says no, it is essential that the parent stays connected and don't withdraw emotionally. If you do, we're going to talk about what happens. So a family faced an aunt whose feelings were hurt. She was butthurt, if you want to say it that way. She was butthurt by their daughter's refusal to give a kiss and a hug to her when they left. And the father said to her, "We do not want little Casey to feel like her affection is something that she owes people. We'd like her to be in charge of her life." These parents wanted their daughter's yes to be yes and her no to be no. So let that land on you for just a second. How many of you as parents told your kid, "Get over there and tell her bye now. You go give her a hug. What's wrong with you?" Let that land for just a second. All right, second thing that parents need to do, they should help their child respect other people's boundaries. Don't give in to temper tantrums in the toy store. As bad as you want to be like, be quiet, shh, everyone's going to hear you. Stop, I'll just give you, here, you can have the toys. As bad as you want to do that, don't give in. Let your no be no, and your yes be yes. When you say no, it is a no. Timeouts. Don't be afraid to use timeouts. Appropriate confrontations. And this one he added, and I'm just going to tell you I have a problem with straight up, but that's okay. And spankings when necessary. I'll just leave it right there. In Proverbs 19:18, it says, discipline your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death. Woo, yikes. Children need to not only be able to give a no, but they also need to be able to take a no. They need to learn to take limits before it's too late, because you guys, when you're 50 years old and learning to take limits, it's not fun. It's hell on earth, honestly. It's so much easier to train them when they're little to be able to do this. So boundary construction. It's mostly evident in 3-year-olds. By 3, this is so hilarious because I'm thinking of 40 and 50-year-olds. But by 3, they should be able to have mastered these 3 things. The ability to emotionally attach to others without giving up their sense of self and their freedom to be apart. Number 2, the ability to say the appropriate no's to others without fear of loss of love. And 3, the ability to take appropriate no's from others without withdrawing emotionally. At the age of 3. If we knew this stuff when we were raising our kids, right? If our parents knew this stuff when they were raising us, if their parents knew that stuff when they were raising them. But a lot of times we're not raised with this stuff. So we're learning it at a late age, and that's okay. At least we're learning it, okay? So 2 other periods of life to focus on boundaries are the adolescent years. I will tell you guys, I know a lot of people don't like the adolescent years. For my kids, they were my favorite years. Man, my kids became my absolute best friends in the whole world, but a lot of people have trouble with these years, with the adolescent years. This is where the teenager reenacts the first years only with more mature issues. They have to face sexuality, which I'm going to tell you the things that they have to face: sexuality, gender, and identity. Do you guys realize that if you're not training your kids in these 3 areas, the world is? And do you know what the world is training them right now? I just want to make sure that you know. To go with your flesh. Whatever your flesh feels, you just go with it. You just follow your heart. It feels so good. How can it be wrong if it feels good? You guys, we have to live a life of denying our flesh. That's what Christianity is all about. So understand that it's the parents' job to train them in this, to talk about your kids. Don't be embarrassed to talk about sexuality. Don't be embarrassed to talk about the things that they need to desperately learn from you, not from the outside world, because the outside world is not painting a pretty picture. The outside world will tell them, look at porn. That's realistic as can be, right? No. It's the most unrealistic thing there is in the world. It's made by Satan himself. So you train your kids during this time, okay? So, and then they become young adults. Children leave home or college and they start a career or they get married. Young adults also suffer a loss of structure during this time. It's a tough time for them. No longer do they have class bells, no schedule imposed on them. They have a great deal amount of freedom, and it's scary. And responsibility, as well as the demand of intimacy and commitment, begins knocking on their door. This can be an intense time of learning more about setting good boundaries. So the earlier the child learns boundaries, the less turmoil will be experienced in life. Duh. I say that now. When we don't learn boundaries, we live in a lot of turmoil and pain, don't we? So let's look at some of the things that went wrong. Boundary problems are rooted in thousands of encounters with others, as well as in our own nature and our own personality. But the most crucial times is obviously the very first years. So if you guys are following along, it's on page 76, withdrawal from boundaries. So he talks about how good relationships are built on the freedom to refuse and confront. In Proverbs 27:17, it says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Let me also remind you guys of a couple verses I'll just one. How about this one? Speak truth in love. If you're speaking harsh truth to people who are not ready to hear truth, and it's out of you trying to manipulate, to control, to curb them, to do anything that is not above board, don't do it. Don't say a word. Speaking truth in love, where is that found? I don't know. But just remember, we've got to be speaking in love. In love. If you're not letting yourself be led by unconditional love, then just shut your mouth. Good relationships and mature character are built on appropriate no's. Developing children need to know that their boundaries will be honored. I want to tell all the grandparents in this room, for your grandchildren, if you didn't know this for your children, now you're learning this and you get to practice on your grandchildren. You need to understand, grandparent, their boundaries need to be honored. Starts with you. If they tell you no, respect them. Honor them. Don't withdraw emotionally. Don't say, well, she's a brat and she pulled away from me. You're the adult. Pull them in. Stay attached emotionally. It is crucial that their disagreements, their practicing, and their experimentation not result in a withdrawal of love. If it does, parents, you're in big trouble with your children. Parents' limits are crucial. The child needs to experience age-appropriate consequences for acting out beyond the parent's boundaries. Where parents don't set and maintain good boundaries, the child suffers another kind of boundary issue. So we aren't talking about letting our kids run wild and free, so don't hear that. Parents need to stay attached and connected to their children even when they disagree with them. Parents, grandparents, adults, stay attached and connected, emotionally attached and connected to your children even when you disagree with them or they disagree with you. It's essential. So, you can certainly get angry, just don't withdraw your love. Hard to do, isn't it? Because most of the time when we get angry, it's the very first thing that we do. We're so ticked off, we're like, get out of our face. And we withdraw love. Have any of you ever told your kid to get out of your face? Okay, good. God's love is constant and it never fails. And that doesn't mean that he approves of our sin. He doesn't. He does not approve of our sin, but he doesn't stop loving us. He doesn't withdraw from us emotionally. He doesn't disconnect from us. But even when we sin, he does not disconnect. If he did, you know what we would think? I'm loved when I'm good, and when I'm bad, I'm cut off. That is the thinking that says the opposite of a bad self is a good self. It's not. The opposite of a bad self is a loved self. We run to the arms of the Father when we fail, when we fall down, when we eat dirt, when we eat mud. We run to the arms of the Father. He doesn't disconnect with us. This is how we get back up going forward. If you don't do that, if you fall down greatly, if you eat mud, if you make a big mistake, and you say, I'm going to try to be good, 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 and the Father all the while is clear over there. It's us that disconnects, not him. He never disconnects from us. God created us with a need for attachment and relationship. And when you pull away from your child, you are practicing spiritual and emotional blackmail. The child either pretends not to agree and keep the relationship, or continue to separate and lose the most important relationship in the world. Which one do you think the child's going to choose? They'll become compliant. They'll say, I'm not going to lose this relationship, so whatever you say, 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 whatever you say. And they'll look for relationships when they get older. Tell me what to do. Tell me how to act. Tell me where to go. Tell me where to work. Tell me how to get up. Tell me what time I have to be to work. Tell me that. It ruins them. They need to be ownership of their life. So if the parent pulls away when the child becomes angry, cantankerous, or experimental, the child learns to hide these parts of themselves. How many of you feel like as an adult, you have parts of you that have been hidden your entire life? Parts of you that have been underneath, that are hidden in shame, like what is wrong with me because of this very thing. When a parent tells a child that it hurts us when you get angry, it's telling the child that they are responsible for the emotional health of the parent. It would be better to say, I know that you are angry, but you still can't have that toy. Instead of saying, it hurts me when you act like that. It just hurts my heart that you would act like such a brat. I know you're angry. I understand that this hurts you, but you can't have the toy. It's a no. That's the appropriate way to build. And then take your hurt feelings and go talk to your spouse or your trusted friend. Okay, so when children feel their parents withdrawing, they feel responsible for mom and dad's feelings. So let's talk a few ways, and I got to scoot and boogie through this. A few ways that parents show their feelings is through their tone of voice. Get over here, no. Or scream. I don't know if you guys are screamers. I was more of the talk under my voice because I wanted to pretend like I was perfect mom. I was never that mom like that, but some are. So tone of voice. How about long silences? Just going to ignore them. My mom said that her mom would get mad at her and ignore her for 2 weeks. And he would say, so my mom would be or my grandmother would be sitting here, my grandfather here, and her here, and she would say to my grandfather, tell the little girl to pass the salt. Think a child doesn't understand that? Body, that tone, that withdrawal. How about crying spells? Oh, you kids are stressing me out. You're driving me crazy. What's wrong with you? How about illness? I'm sick. I am so sick because you have me so stressed out. I am just sick. I have a headache and I have anxiety and I'm going to bed. Children of parents like this grow up to be adults who are terrified that setting boundaries will cause severe isolation and abandonment. Hostility against boundaries. This one is growing up in a home that no meant rebellion. How many of you grew up in a religious home where no meant you were rebellious? Okay, a couple of us. The parents become angry at the child's attempt to separate themselves, and hostility can emerge, and angry words can emerge, physical punishment can emerge, and inappropriate consequences. I'll give you a few examples. You'll do what I say, and you'll like doing it. You'll do it my way or the highway. I brought you into this world, and I can surely take you out. Don't question me. I know best. You need an attitude adjustment? I'm just the one to give it to you. You've got no reason to feel bad. What's wrong with you? This will make a child crazy. Listen, it'll make a child crazy because it is denial of the separate soul. It pressures the child into becoming a people pleaser instead of a God pleaser. As long as I can make mom happy, grandma happy, dad happy, uncle happy, I'm just fine. And so that child looks this way their whole entire lives and never this way. Never to the arms of a father who never disconnects from them and never gets unbonded to them. Children need to be under the authority and control of their parents, but when parents punish the children for growing independence, the child will usually retreat into hurt and resentment. Discipline is the art of teaching children self-control by using consequences. If you do this, you have a choice, and it just like Jesus does with us. Maria, you have a choice. If you get up and go to work in the morning, you'll have a job. If you choose not to get up and go to work in the morning, you'll lose your job. And if you lose your job, you'll lose your money. We all have choices every single day. We have choices whether we're faithful to our spouse or not. You realize that? I have a choice in that. I have my autonomy. I choose to be faithful to my husband because I love him. But a lot of times people have never experienced any consequences whatsoever, and so they have no idea how, first of all, how to own themselves, and then how my reactions causes consequences. What I do matters because there is consequences, and that's discipline. You guys, when the Father disciplines you when you're 50 years old, it hurts, but it's so good. I just went through a period of major discipline from my father, and let me tell you, he never shoved me away, not 1 second. He never withdrew from me, not 1 second. He brought me close to him, and it hurt. He spanked me good with consequences, really, really good. But it was because he loves me. How do your children feel about your discipline? If they feel like they're terrified of you, If they feel like you're going to beat them every time that they step out of line or have an opinion that's differing from yours, you're going to teach them to hide in shame. You're going to teach them to hide who they are. Irresponsibility should cause us discomfort that motivates us to become more responsible. My way or the highway teaches the child to pretend to be obedient when the parent is near, and then when the parent is away, I'll do whatever I want to do. Right, Jason? You have a choice teaches the child to be responsible for their own actions. Let's skip on down because we're running out of time. When parents meet their children's disagreement or disobedience or practicing with hostility, you deny them the benefit of being trained. Remember, our house is being built, so all of us are being trained. They don't learn that delaying gratification and being responsible have benefits. The only thing they learn is how to avoid my parents' wrath. Ever wonder why Christians fear an angry God no matter how much they read about his love? That's why. It's because these small children grow up into people who are terrified of God just like they were of their parents. So kids learn quickly how to hide behind a compliant smile when they grow up, and they suffer greatly. These are the adults that have severe depression, anxiety, relationship conflicts, substance abuse, dissociating. I can list a million. While some become pliable and enmeshed into others, which we call codependency, others turn hostile and controlling. Let's go to someone who is over control, a parent. Too strict of rules and limits. I will protect them from making any mistakes. I will put them in a bubble. I will bubble wrap them. I will put them in a glass figurine, and I'll never let them get out of my reach. Never let them go and practice and fall down and make mistakes and raise a flower. Yes, exactly like that. Mom will make all the decisions. Dad will make all the decisions, whichever one it be. Keep your kids from playing with other kids to keep them from being hurt or around any other bad influences. Listen, we learn maturity by constant use. That's how we learn. And over-controlling children become dependent and have difficulty setting and keeping boundaries. They also have a problem taking risks and being creative. It stifles their creativity. Okay, lack of limits. He talked about Eileen, who constantly dropped the ball. Her husband was always highly upset. She was like, why are you always upset? I'm just dropping the ball. No big deal. Who cares? I let him down. Who cares? But Eileen's parents, they couldn't stand to make her do anything hard or to discipline her with timeouts. And they definitely did not give her consequences and no spankings. And though they thought that giving her lots and lots of love and forgiveness would help her become an adult that she needed to be, so anytime she would mess up, mom covered. This is called an enabler, in case you guys don't know that term. Lack of limits hurts a child's development. Lack of parental limits coupled with lack of connection, train wreck. It will produce an aggressively controlling person. That's what it creates into them. Imagine a 4-year-old throwing a fit in total control of the mom, and mom begins to plead to calm the kid down. Please, okay, you can have whatever you want. It's okay, baby. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Now imagine a 40-year-old doing the same thing. And what are they looking for? They try to control by it. Okay, inconsistent limits. This one is when the parents combine strict and lax limits. This sends conflicting messages. Children don't know what the rules of the family and of their family are. In an addict family, a parent may be loving and kind one day and unreasonably and harsh the next day. This jacks up a kid's psyche. Next one goes right along with it. It's trauma. Trauma is an intensely painful emotional experience. And we can experience trauma at any age. We can even experience trauma now. Our son just a year ago began having seizures, and we walk up to his room, and he looked exactly like our other son who had overdosed, exactly like him, foam out of his mouth, and he was black. Talk about traumatizing. Like it took PTSD to a new level in our family. So trauma can be set in at any age, but it's when you've come from emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, debilitating illnesses, that causes a lot of trauma, death, divorce, extreme financial hardships, and on and on and on. These can all be very traumatic. Traumatic is different than withdrawal and hostility. Those Trauma is like a tree being hit with lightning. It affects boundary development. So picture a tree, a full standing tree, and all of a sudden it gets hit with lightning. What does the lightning do to that tree? It stunts its growth, huh? Yeah, it stunts its growth. It makes it halts it. So, and that's exactly what trauma does in our lives too. So it affects boundary development because it shakes up two necessary foundations to children's growth. Number one, the world is reasonably safe. And when trauma hits them, what does a kid think? This ain't a safe world at all. And then number two, they have control over their own lives. And when trauma hits, what does a child think? I have no control over my life. So children become unsure that they are safe and protected, and they become scared to death that they have no say-so in any danger that approaches them. I'm gonna skip that story. If you guys want to read it, there's a story on page 83 about Jerry. It's really good. So the heart of God seems to beat especially close to the victim of trauma. Isaiah 61:1 says, He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. So if you've gone through trauma, understand your Father's going to bind you up. He's going to bind up your wounds. That's what we have the beautiful Heavenly Father for us. He's right there with us. He desires the wounds of the traumatized to be bound up by love. So, own our character traits and sinfulness from the womb. We contribute to our boundary issues by our own individual character styles. Perhaps you've always been active or confrontational, exploring new horizons, or quiet and reflective. Depending on what your personality is, some of us have maybe all four of those. Some of us we tend to go this way or tend to go that way. If you're naturally confrontational, you'll probably deal with boundary problems aggressively. And if you're more quiet and reflective, you may shy away from boundaries altogether. But listen, we were all born with a sin nature, and that nature enslaves us to the law of sin and death, from which only Jesus can save us from. And the good news is that He wants to save all of us from this. If let's say that you feel like you have been bound by a sinful behavior or maybe a particular pattern from the time you're little, Jesus wants to help you change that pattern. He wants to help you unwire that pattern and rewire it. I say pattern because from the time we were little, we learned, didn't we? We learned how to build this thing. And once we realize now that we've gotten older that we built something that it won't stand, now it's time to go back and begin at that pattern again and do it all over again. But understand that Jesus wants to save every single one of us from our sin nature. All of us have it, but Jesus has come to save us from it. We have to learn humility. Humility is our superpower. Humility is your superpower. Humility is my superpower. And recognize when we are resisting it. If you're resisting the humbling process, if you're resisting being dependent on God, recognize it real quickly and say, God, I don't want to walk in opposition to you. I want to learn things your way. So in the next chapter, we will look at what the Bible says about how boundaries should operate. We're going to do the law. I think it's called the laws of boundaries in the next one. So we're going to take a little bit of time. Does anybody have any comments, stories, questions, anything that you want to bring to what we talked about tonight? Or boundaries. It could even be from last week. Go ahead.
You know, and I mean, I had a special made paddle that got drilled holes every time they acted up again, so it would let the air through it. So, I mean, and that's the correction I was, like, if they were in Walmart and they threw a fit, they got beat. And then I read that verse, but then if I would continue to read down it, it says, but the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. And I think it's crazy that I choose not to read down further. Because that's what Jesus does for me. Yes. I mean, I'm a jacked up mess. And I failed Him almost on a constant basis. But he doesn't sit there and beat me within an inch of my life like he got me.
Yep.
His
Yep.
So anyway, it's just interesting hearing this. I don't know even today if I was to raise kids again that I would like to do this. I like to spank kids.
Oh. It is easy. It's the easy way. Yeah.
I know that when you get after your grandbabies and you give them options, I think just whoop them and be over it.
Yeah.
To be honest with you guys, my whole family teases me because I give my grandbabies options. I say, you get to choose this or this. And they all laugh at me and they make fun of me. That's the truth. Yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Let's be honest. One second, when you're having to give your child choices, it is definitely harder than picking up something and hitting them. But what is it going to do to their little souls when you pick something up and hit them? It destroys them. It destroys them. Okay, go ahead. Definitely. Yes, good point. Yes. 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 How many of you have heard your parents say, "Stop yelling"? What are we teaching them? Go ahead, Linda. Oh, that's great. I love it. I love it. Me too, my girl. Me too. We didn't know better. Go ahead. Oh, yeah. 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 Yep. 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 Who does he live with? With you? Okay. Yeah, you'll probably have to do these stages with him. Whoever he's living with, whoever's spending the majority of time with him, that's what he'll internalize. The voice that he's hearing on a daily basis, that's what he'll internalize. Yep. Yes. Gotcha. Yeah. Anybody else? What's that? Good point. You guys can tell in our family which one was the disciplinarian, which one was the enabler, right? Ah. All right, guys. Well, thank you all for coming out. We will see you. Absolutely, we'll see you tomorrow. And for those of you that come out to the devotions tomorrow morning, and coffee and donuts on Friday mornings, or Saturday night. We have a special band playing Saturday night and a special guest speaker. So whatever you guys can make it out to, we will see you. Good evening. Nope.